1893. Chicago builds a city of domes and marble palaces in months. Photographs show columns older than memory. Then most of it vanishes. Was it meant to disappear, or was something already there? Like and subscribe. Drop your theory below. 1893. Chicago rises from smoke and industry, and in the center of it, a city appears. White, monumental, classical, columns, domes, arches stretching across artificial lagoons. The photographs feel older than the date stamped on them. This is the White City, the world's Columbian exposition. Today, in Old World and Tartaria circles, it is presented differently. Not as an exhibition, not as temporary architecture, but as evidence. The claim is direct. These buildings were not built in 1893. They were already there. Remnants of an older civilization, a forgotten empire. Some call it Tartaria. Others simply say Old World. The argument usually begins with scale. The administration building alone rises with a central dome over 250 feet high. The Court of Honor stretches in perfect symmetry. Massive colonnades line the water. The finish appears marble. The ornamentation is precise. The proportions are academic. And then comes the question: how did a city like this appear in barely 2 years? Construction officially began in 1891. The fair opened in May 1893. Less than 24 months, tens of thousands of workers, entire palaces completed, electrified at night, reflected in calm lagoons. The narrative pauses here. If this was truly built in under 2 years, the claim says, it would represent an industrial miracle beyond its time. Therefore, perhaps it was not built then at all. Another detail repeats across videos and forums. Most of the White City did not survive. After the fair closed in October 1893, structures were dismantled. Some burned in a major fire in 1894. By the early 20th century, little remained. Temporary, demolished, erased. The pattern feels familiar. Monumental architecture, then destruction, then silence. In the Tartaria framing, this becomes intention. The buildings were said to be too advanced, their style too refined, their materials too durable for a temporary event. Why destroy something so grand unless it exposed something older? I pulled the thread from the images first. Photographs from 1893 show smooth white facades, perfect classical symmetry, vast plazas empty of modern clutter, no skyscrapers in the background yet. The scene feels disconnected from industrial Chicago. The contrast fuels the theory. Outside the fairgrounds, smoke, brick, steel, railroads. Inside, Rome reborn. The claim sharpens further. Supporters point to architectural complexity, deep cornices, sculptural programs, massive staircases. They argue that such detail requires long timelines, skilled stone carving, heavy masonry foundations, not plaster shells. Then comes the demolition question again. If these were only exhibition buildings, why invest so much labor? Why build domes and palaces only to dismantle them months later? Why not preserve them as civic monuments? The answer offered by the theory is not engineering, it is concealment. Some versions extend further. They suggest that the fair was staged around pre-existing structures discovered after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, that the construction was merely renovation, that official timelines compress earlier history. I checked how the claim is usually told. It relies heavily on photographs of the Court of Honor, the administration dome at sunset, long exposures of illuminated facades. The The same angles appear again and again, often without captions, often without construction context. The visual repetition creates weight. The images look solid, eternal. But here the record shifts slightly. Original fair documentation describes most major buildings as constructed with a material called staff, a mixture of plaster, cement, and jute fiber applied over wood and iron frames, designed to imitate stone, designed for speed. Yet the photographs do not reveal that easily. In black and white, staff reads as marble, so we are left with a tension. On one side, scale, speed, demolition. On the other, documented plans, budgets, materials, deadlines. The claim frames the White City as a rediscovered ancient capital. The official record frames it as the pinnacle of late 19th century exhibition architecture. Both begin with the same images. The difference begins with what we assume those images represent. The pattern is clear: monument, destruction, silence. But the silence may not be where we think it is. The claim feels modern. It sounds like it belongs to the age of viral clips and algorithmic loops. But I wanted to know when the White City was first pulled into the old world narrative. So I went backward. I searched early 20th century commentary, architectural journals, memoirs from fair organizers, newspapers from 1893 to 1920. I looked for language suggesting pre-existing ruins, hidden civilizations, suppressed origins. Nothing. Criticism existed, but it was different. Some architects accused the fair of romantic classicism. Others called it theatrical, a stage set masking industrial reality. But no one in that period suggested the buildings were ancient. The record remains consistent through the 1930s, 40s, 50s. The White City is described as influential, as the birth of the City Beautiful movement, as a turning point in American urban design. Temporary, yes. Artificial, yes, but not inherited. The silence here is notable. If the fair had revealed remnants of an older civilization, someone would have written it. Rival architects, competing cities, journalists hostile to the organizers. There was no shortage of controversy in 1893 America. The first trace of reinterpretation appears much later. In the late 20th century, fragments of speculation emerge in niche publications discussing lost technologies and architectural anomalies. But even then, the White City is rarely central. It is an example of grandeur, not evidence of antiquity. The shift accelerates in the early 2000s. Online forums begin assembling image collections, administration building, manufactures and liberal arts building, the peristyle. The captions change tone. Instead of temporary exhibition hall, the phrasing becomes impossible structure for its time. This is where the narrative reframes construction speed as implausibility. A repeated argument appears. The manufacturers and liberal arts building covered more than 30 acres under one roof. The dome of the administration building rivaled European cathedrals in scale. Could wood and plaster achieve that safely? But when I check engineering reports from the exposition, the language is technical, not mystical. Iron trusses, timber frameworks, load calculations, fire risk concerns, insurance valuations based on temporary materials. The early online claims rarely cite those documents directly. They cite images. Another key shift occurs when the White City is linked explicitly to Tartaria. That linkage does not appear in 19th century records. It does not appear in early architectural history. It surfaces in digital communities already focused on mud flood theories, orphan trains, and erased empires. The White City becomes visual proof. The logic runs like this. If similar neoclassical buildings appear across the United States and Europe in the late 1800s, and if some were demolished or remodeled, perhaps they were inherited from a prior civilization. The fair then becomes a concentrated display of that inheritance, but the wording evolves gradually. Early forum posts speak cautiously. Could this have been older? Later videos assert more firmly. This was old world architecture repurposed. The certainty increases over time. The documentation does not. I track the phrase White City Tartaria across archived web captures. It is absent before the late 2000s. Then, it appears sporadically. After 2015, the frequency rises sharply alongside broader Old World content. The pattern suggests convergence, not origin. The White City was not the birthplace of the Tartaria narrative. It was absorbed into it. A visually powerful example incorporated into an existing framework. This matters, because when a structure becomes symbolic inside a theory, its original documentation often recedes. Images detach from context. Construction contracts become less visible than domes at sunset. There is another detail often overlooked. The fairgrounds were heavily photographed during construction. Scaffolding visible, wooden frames exposed, plaster applied in stages. These images exist in archives. They are less circulated. The claim rarely begins with those photographs. Instead, it begins with completion, full symmetry, finished facades, night illumination reflecting on water. The first trace of the White City as Old World artifact does not emerge from 1893. It emerges from reinterpretation a century later, and that tells us something about how narratives form, not from absence of records, but from selective repetition. The record at this stage does not disappear. It shifts from print to digital, from engineering report to image compilation, from blueprint to montage. The White City remains the same set of structures. What changes is the frame placed around them. Once the White City enters the Old World narrative, the spread accelerates. I map the pattern across platforms. Forums first, then long-form blogs, then YouTube compilations. After 2016, short-form edits begin to dominate. The same 3 or 4 images circulate repeatedly. Administration building at dusk, the Court of Honor from across the lagoon, a wide shot of the manufacturers and liberal arts building, sometimes cropped, sometimes colorized, rarely contextualized. The repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates weight. In early posts, the tone is speculative. How was this built so fast? Why destroy something so grand? The language invites doubt but stops short of certainty. By the mid-2000s, the tone hardens. The question mark disappears. The phrase shifts from "could it be" to "this proves." The spread follows a recognizable structure. First, a visual hook, a high-resolution scan of the White City. No caption beyond a single line. 1893, Chicago. The date feels misplaced. The architecture looks classical. The viewer fills the gap. Second, a comparison. Industrial Chicago outside the fairgrounds, brick factories, smokestacks, rail yards. Then, the White City, symmetry, domes, colonnades. The contrast implies discontinuity. Third, the demolition narrative. The fire of 1894 is mentioned briefly. The dismantling is framed as suspicious. The word temporary is treated as implausible rather than documented. The pattern repeats across channels. I noticed another shift. The original construction term, staff, almost disappears in these retellings. When it appears, it is often dismissed without citation. Plaster over wood is described as incapable of producing such scale. The engineering language is replaced with incredulity. But when I check fair construction photographs, scaffolding is visible. Wooden frames beneath ornamentation. Workers applying plaster molds in segments. These images exist in public archives. They circulate far less. Why? Because unfinished buildings are less persuasive than completed ones. The spread intensifies when the White City is inserted into broader Tartaria compilations. It appears alongside images of European exposition halls, Russian neoclassical buildings, and American courthouses. The implication becomes systemic. If similar architecture appears across continents in the same century, perhaps it predates the century. This is where visual montage overtakes chronology. Buildings from different countries and decades are placed side by side. The context dissolves. What remains is aesthetic similarity. The mind begins to group them as one phenomenon. The White City benefits from this. It is large. It is cohesive. It appears ancient in style, and it was removed quickly. That combination makes it ideal for symbolic use. The spread also reveals selective omission. Few viral posts include budget figures from the exposition. Few reference the board of architects led by Daniel Burnham. Few mention the financial strain that made permanent construction unrealistic. Those details complicate the narrative. Complication slows virality. Simplicity travels faster. Another evolution appears in wording. Early descriptions emphasize mystery. Later ones emphasize suppression. The demolition becomes intentional erasure. The 1894 fire becomes a cleansing event. The absence of surviving structures becomes evidence rather than outcome. Yet, the archival record of the fire is mundane. Insurance claims, newspaper coverage describing wind conditions, firefighting limitations. The tone is logistical, not conspiratorial, but that tone rarely spreads. The spread pattern shows something else. As engagement increases, the claim broadens. The White City is no longer just a question of architecture. It becomes proof of a hidden technological past. Electric lighting at the fair is reframed as recovered ancient energy. Large-scale ornamentation is reframed as inherited knowledge. The narrative absorbs new elements, and with each addition, the original construction timeline fades further into the background. I also tracked comment sections. Viewers frequently cite personal disbelief as evidence. No way they built that in 2 years. This looks older than America. The emotional response becomes part of the argument, but disbelief is not documentation. The spread thrives on the visual paradox. Classical antiquity recreated in an industrial age. Speed of construction paired with scale of ornament. The algorithm rewards strong contrast. The White City provides it. Yet the more I trace the spread, the clearer the structure becomes. The claim did not emerge from missing archives. It emerged from abundant images. Images detached from their construction context. Images repeated until they feel foundational. The White City becomes less a historical event and more a visual anchor inside a larger theory. And once an image becomes symbolic, it is rarely returned to its paperwork. But the paperwork still exists. The record has not vanished. It has simply been overshadowed by the montage. The White City leaves two kinds of traces. One is visual, domes, Colonnades, reflections in still water. A city that looks carved from stone. The other is administrative, contracts, material orders, payroll lists, engineering drawings, insurance valuations. I return to those. The official reports of the World's Columbian Exposition describe a construction method called staff, a composite of plaster of Paris, cement and jute fiber, molded over wood and iron frameworks. Designed for speed, designed for surface illusion, the intent was explicit: create monumentality without permanence. Daniel Burnham, the director of works, documented tight deadlines and budget constraints. The fair was financed by bonds, private investment, and municipal backing. Permanent stone construction would have multiplied costs beyond feasibility. The manufacturers and liberal arts building, often cited as proof of impossibility, was in fact one of the largest temporary structures ever attempted. Its scale was unprecedented, but its structural core was iron and timber truss work. The exterior ornamentation was applied, not carved. This distinction matters. Applied surface reads differently in black and white photography. Staff reflects light evenly. It smooths imperfections. It resembles marble under certain exposures. The image feels heavier than the material. The demolition record is also clear. After the fair closed in October 1893, most buildings were not intended to survive. Some structures were sold for scrap. Others deteriorated quickly under weather exposure. In July 1894, a fire destroyed major sections of the remaining complex. Newspapers of the time described dry timber, high winds, and rapid spread. No gap in reporting, no unexplained silence. Insurance assessments valued the buildings as temporary property. Claims were processed accordingly. Financial records show the exposition company dissolving after debts were settled. The logic is administrative, not secretive. Yet one building did survive in altered form. The Palace of Fine Arts was constructed with more durable materials. Its structure endured. Today, it stands as the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, rebuilt in limestone in the 20th century. The intention to preserve at least one structure was documented from the start. This complicates the erasure narrative. If the White City were a concealed ancient complex, selective survival would require selective concealment. But the documentation shows selective budgeting instead. There is another layer. The White City was not isolated in style. It was part of the Beaux-Arts movement, heavily influenced by European academies. Architects trained in Paris brought classical vocabulary to American civic projects. The fair was a demonstration of cultural aspiration, not archaeological inheritance. Still, one question persists. How was it built so fast? The answer appears in workforce numbers. At peak, more than 40,000 laborers worked on the site. Prefabrication techniques were employed. Ornament molds were reused across facades. The lagoon and landscape design masked structural repetition. Efficiency replaced longevity. Speed does not equal antiquity, but speed does produce disbelief. The record supports a temporary architectural triumph. It does not support pre-existing ruins. It does not document discovery beneath the fairgrounds. Excavation reports from the site reference grading, landfill, and engineered foundations consistent with 19th century urban planning. There is no prior city mapped beneath Jackson Park. What survives the record then? The scale was real. The craftsmanship was real. The ambition was real. The temporariness was also real. What remains? Inference. That demolition implies concealment. that classical style implies ancient origin, that photographic solidity implies stone permanence. The White City sits at the intersection of spectacle and documentation. Its disappearance was scheduled. Its materials were specified. Its finances were recorded. The myth persists because the images persist, and images, without their paperwork, invite interpretation. The archive does not close the question of why people feel the White City looks older than it was, but it does answer how it was built. The pattern is not silence, it is surface. Beneath the surface, the record remains intact.